All right. So, for me in book 8, it really starts out very difficult to read overall. Oh, let me share my screen so you can see where I'm at. So a lot of the verbiage here, and I don't know if it's a issue with the translation or if it is in fact a reflection of how Marcus is speaking in his writings at this time, but they're very almost ADHD in nature and how they like ping pong all over the place, in my opinion.
Mm.
Um, they just feel real all over the place and inconsistent thought processes. I mean, we already get that a little bit with how these are numbered, so I imagine the numbers represent like separation and entries, right? But overall, it felt kind of weird reading through book 8. I thought book 9 was a little more cohesive, but overall book 8 was just real difficult for me to concentrate on. I tried real hard when I was going through it to focus, and because of the wording, I would get lost and forget what I thought the point was by the time I finished a sentence sometimes.
Yeah, I feel that.
Um Overall, except from the for the more spiritual divine reflections he has, I think a lot of chapter 8 is just reinforcing his own thought process, almost like he's trying to like give himself a mantra of like focus on this, think about this. um and then he asks himself questions like, you have no leisure to read books, what then? You have no leisure to check your insolence.
Yeah.
He gets a little spicy in a couple places, similarly. And he seems to. So I know overall these writings are for himself. Oh, Lee's here. Hi, Lee.
Hello, sorry I'm late. I'm also kind of sick,
Oh
so try not to
no, I'm
cough for the
sorry.
recording.
It's fine. I was just telling Ben that overall, like, book 8 to me was very rambly. It was very ping pong in nature with its thought
Mm-hmm.
processes. And it was very circular thought processes. I know he does a lot of repetition and reinforcement of his thoughts on stuff, but for me, this was almost too much in book 8.
Yeah, maybe not good to think of it a as a solid point, right?
Yeah,
These are
no,
just
yeah.
things that he said, and yeah, a lot of them have nothing to do with each other. I didn't finish
Well,
the reading this week. I worked a lot, so I
that's fine. Well, even segment
didn't
by
do good, but
segment, I feel like they're weird. Like, even if I just take a number segment and don't look, before or after it, at times the thought process doesn't feel whole, you know?
yeah, you get the feeling that like he's again not really communicating to somebody, right? He's just voicing his own frustrations on the page to
Yeah.
himself. So he knows what he's referencing, but sometimes we may or may not have already heard
Mm-hmm.
about that somewhere else. But since it's not an actual like
I
an
w-
actual book,
Yeah, I think that this book, book 8, reflects the nature of his private writings more than the other ones before, where I think it was a pretty okay read for the most part. Like, but book 8 definitely feels like I'm missing half the story.
maybe the difference in approach when you start a project and you're like, ah, yes, I'm going to write this down. You see, my life was like this, and this is how I learned it. And then
Mm-hmm.
eventually he's just like going through some stuff as he travels around his kingdom and around the empire. And it's like, ah, man, this one is a lot of complaining, isn't it? Like, ah, people did that, and then people always do this, and why are they like that? And let me think, this is why I think maybe they could be like that, and what they should
Mm-hmm.
do instead. But he's more, uh, maybe irritable at this point. And who
Yeah.
knows? I mean, we don't know who he's talking about in most of these. Like, there's probably a specific incident or person that brought it on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if it is a generalized social issue. He's still like, what wasn't there one in the very beginning where he's talking about people playing pranks?
Yes, he does talk
And
about
some
that.
like people will just keep doing it till it's not funny anymore. Like even if it makes you irritated, they just keep doing it. Somebody played something he
So
didn't
there's
like and they
something going on, I think, in his real world.
yeah.
Like somebody's trying to play a prank on him, and he's like, "I'm so sick of this shit."
Yeah, like that's so annoying. Like I got work to do. We don't have time for this. Uh
It's always it is funny to me. He reinforces again like people are gonna do what they're gonna do in their nature in this book, right? He reinforces this concept he said before, like, why are you surprised a fig tree bears figs, right? He effectively says, but then, like you said, he has this aggravation towards people, and he
mhm.
goes on to this other tangents in some places where it's like you have to take ownership of your actions. um but then he keeps going back and forth what it feels like, almost reprimanding the people in his life like who might be pranking him, and then also what does a bubble get in the swelling or lose in the breaking, of waves and stuff. I think that's interesting. So he just
Mm.
like seems to be having almost an argument with himself as I read through book 8 of, on the one hand, I'm angry. On the other hand, people are going to do what they're going to do. And on the other hand, I need to chill, but also people need to take ownership for themselves.
Yeah, maybe it's that point where like on a conceptual level, he understands how people should be. And on his good days, he does it quite well. But on a bad day, he's having a bit of trouble with it,
Yeah.
you know. The human part is getting the better of him. He knows what he should be doing and he can like logically say the same as he always has, well, people are what they are. Sometimes they can be better and we can't be upset with them for being the product of their circumstance and so on and all these kinds of commentary, but then he's still upset anyway because that's
Right.
just what happens, right? Almost like a parent who's like started out saying, yes, I see how the world should be, and I have these great plans for my empire and all of the people in it, and we can, improve the world if everyone would just do these things, and I can, here's how you do it. And these are things that we can, like, some of them he has control over, right? Like changing uh, institutionalized parts
Mm-hmm.
of their culture, he can actually do something about it as emperor. So he's talking about, if we can change this and we can change that and we can restructure society slightly more toward this, and then we can make everyone great. And of course, that's not reality. And probably, I mean, I wish we knew how many years apart this book is compared to like
I
the first or
was
the second.
just telling Ben, I was trying to Google, and I was like, I wonder if anyone's, got a timeline corresponding to when he wrote each book or something, and I couldn't find a gosh darn thing. Like I looked.
Did it have uh, a location at the end of this one or no? I didn't get
Um,
toward the end.
no.
No. Yeah, some of them it said like a city, and then that we could probably track.
Right.
Okay,
Oh,
he
what?
was here, then he was here, then
Mm-hmm.
he was here, which means it was 10 years later, or it was only, 3 months later, or whatever. But, oh well. I mean, that's kind of the feeling I had is if he understands it, and he understands it really well, and he's practiced it for a long time, and he's done it, feet on the ground kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But even so, I mean, we're all here, and we're reading and studying and practicing, and there are still days when it gets, we don't follow it as well as we could when we're well fed and well rested and surrounded by people who are doing it too, right? And
Yeah.
something happens and somebody else has a bad day and they take it out on us or something, and then we're not so good at, even if we know in our head what we need to do, sometimes the body is doing other things, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the feeling I get. Is he knows, he just can't do it today.
I highlighted this because I think it made sense generally, but it was just weird. If you have observed a hand or a foot cut off and removed from the body, Just such a thing is that man, as far as lies in his power, who is discontented with fate and breaks off from the interest of mankind, or who by a selfish act has cut himself off from the union of nature, for by nature he is part of the whole. I have to tell you, it is these kind of really long, twisty sentences that made this book very hard to read for book
Oh,
8.
I
Like,
wonder. I should go check the other. I found another translation which also was very nice for in the upper corners it told you what book it was. So like scrolling through, you don't have to remember what page I was on.
ah, mm-hmm.
Um, I could just go quickly and go, oh, okay, here's book 7, so we gotta go a little farther, whatever. But I wonder if the translation maybe would make it slightly easier to understand. I didn't have trouble with that. Like, that sentence made sense to me, but it is also quite a long thought. And it's
So
an image, right?
that thought
So it's like
itself was not the one
picturing
I
it.
struggled with, but I feel like he does this a lot. He has a lot of long thoughts in this particular book. And
Mm.
so if you're not peppy, if you're not like in the right mental state,
Yeah.
I think it can be very difficult to kind of hold on to the concentration necessary to really, you know,
Mm.
get some of the sentences.
Yeah, it feels more like reading an academic text, oddly enough, even though it's kind of the opposite because it was private writings, but it
Mm-hmm.
feels, yeah, like you have to pay attention to it and think why is this word being used, or what is this referring to back to this other part. And I could definitely see how that might be
So this translation I have, because I have a second translation I have available as well, does seem to translate it a little more digestibly. That was not a good sentence. Anyway, have you ever seen a severed hand or foot or decapitated head just lying somewhere far away from the body it belonged to? That's what we do to ourselves, or try to, when we rebel against what happens to us, when we segregate ourselves, or when we do something selfish. So, yeah, that was interesting how different those two read.
and it is essentially what he's saying in the other one too, right?
Yeah.
Different wording, same point,
Mm-hmm.
but that also has a lot less of an impact, doesn't it? That second one. Maybe it's a little like too.
Simplified.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, here's the image. Just picture a severed part of the body. That's the person.
Mm-hmm.
Versus in the like the first one that we're reading here, it adds a lot of little details that I think both carry the image farther, and also it's like very clear, right? By a selfish act has cut himself from the union of nature.
That's why with these older texts, it is really fascinating to look at multiple translations, right? So I do think that that has a lot of worth to take the time to. If you're really going to try to, tear these apart, you really need multiple translations
Mm-hmm.
because our understanding of how to translate things changes over time. Culture changes how we translate things. So it's fascinating, really.
Well, even individuals, right?
Mm-hmm.
What one person thought when they read this and what another person thought was important when they read it may not have been the same. And even if they are, one might be a much better writer.
Right.
You know, the person to write that sentence in English of the first one takes a lot more, I think, unless he actually wrote it like that with each comma, like all the breaks in those places. It takes a lot more like concentration and skill to be able to
Mm-hmm.
make it actually make sense. Then the second one was just like, yeah, you know when somebody's got like a something chopped off, that's the guy. That's that person, right? They still understood it, but it's not the same quality of writing.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, translators are also people, and they are also writers, ideally, and they'll have a different. Even if the translation approach was quite similar, two people could have a very different actual product at the end, just based on their own like writing style, understanding of the text. They may seem very unaffected by that image and just kind of threw it out there, but maybe a different part of this translation has something that's like very heartfelt and they, you know, were more affected by what he wrote there. I don't know.
Yeah. This is wildly different. So I highlighted 38 in the other version. If you are so quick at discerning, says one, discern and judge wisely. And then over in this one, the stench of decay, rotting meat in a bag. Look at it clearly if you can. What?
What?
How are these? What?
I can kind of see, like, I can imagine a similar, what could have led to both, right?
Yeah.
So it was probably longer. I would imagine it was longer than 38 actually is written here, and that he probably just skipped something because maybe it wasn't the I don't know, maybe the image wasn't that good or it was kind of written poorly, so he just said, the point of it is if you can judge things, just make sure you're doing it wisely. Versus this other one is like we can probably assume, I guess, from it that maybe there was some idea about when you are having a feeling about something, like you can't see it, but you have a feeling because you can smell it, like you can
Right.
you'll know what it is, like trust your judgment, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Don't mistake it for what it looks like on the outside, kind of thing, maybe, but neither one says that.
Yeah. I I don't know. I I I remember comparing the first book in these two and going, I like the other copy, the one we're reading through. And I'm starting to see a little bit of why I might have made that decision.
Yeah, I want to find the. I don't know where my tablet is right now. I'm just trying to read on my phone.
It's fine. No worries. Um
But I had another book downloaded on there. I want to see what they say because that's another thing too, I guess. If we can find a translation that's like easy to get through while not sacrificing any of that,
mhm.
maybe we'll have an easier time. Because yeah, I feel like it takes me more time to read this one too, which is part of why I'm routinely not finishing it all the way.
How does this one put this? Huh. A soul unembarrassed with passion is a very citadel, the most impregnable security for man in the future. Hither we may retire and defy our enemies. And I think approximately. Let's see. Oh, I was looking at the wrong one. It's interesting how much shorter this one is. The mind without passions is a fortress. No place is more secure. Once we take refuge there, we are safe forever. Not to see this is ignorance. To see it and not seek safety means misery. This one, the other version I'm looking at, it seems a little more concise at times for sure.
Mm.
50. Cucumber's bitter? Throw it out! Oh, look how much longer. Oh, yeah. So that's 50. And then 50 over here feels chunkier.
Well, they're pretty similar in size, aren't they?
It's not too bad.
It kind of, you
This
know
one's
what
pretty straightforward, though.
uh, yeah, there are some. I did check that one for a bit before too, and it was kind of jarring at times how different it was.
Yeah.
In one of the earlier books, I think I read this version, and it's it kind of makes me think like, when we were reading this and we summarize something that he says, we summarize, on this wordier translation. Sometimes we're like, yeah, he basically said this, and it has the attitude. It actually has the same attitude
Yeah.
that we seem to ascribe. So I guess something's getting across. Like, this is just how he is, but
Yeah. I agree. To get back to the meat of the text, I will say he just once again is like reiterating some of those ideals, but then also the ideals that we try to practice ourselves in the when you're trying to follow a more Buddhist practice of being mindful, right? I think a lot of these little sections in book 8 can really be wrapped up in generally applying a lot of mindfulness to your actions and being a sensible person who isn't overcome with emotion, right?
mm.
And that's I kind of read 71 as being give people the benefit of the doubt. I'm interested to see what this other doesn't even go to 71. Holy cow. What? Weird. Oh, it has 61. And that seems similar. To enter others' minds and let them enter yours.
Oh yeah, there's a typo there because the one before it is 60.
Oh, okay, good. That is a typo. All right. Typo.
And that was actually a useful one because I'm reading that as giving the same freedom to the thought, as in like allowing, don't just reject people immediately, but think about the merit of what their actual thought is, kind of regardless of the person themselves.
Yeah.
Really consider what they're saying before you reject it. Because again, I think he very much would say not all thoughts are equal, and
Yeah.
not everybody is wise, right? There are certainly things that people could say or think that we should not entertain as much, but you have to really consider it before you can judge that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For sure. Book 9. There we go. Got this
Oh,
all
here, I found
lined up.
another translation. It says, penetrate into the governing part of others and lay yours upon them to enter into it. I don't know if this is going to be an easier translation. What was the other one we had? 20, 20 something, right? I want to see how this one compares on the... Wait, which number was the other one we were comparing?
It was 61.
Oh, before that one.
Uh,
I just want to check it on this one.
the other one we were comparing
20 something?
was, I think it was 38.
Oh, 38?
So that was the one that was rotting meat. Yeah, 38. It was 38.
If you get discerning. Okay, this one says, if you have great penetration, exercise it in what is the subject of the greatest wisdom. So those
different.
three together?
Those are so different.
So if you're good at, I mean, great penetration could be discerning. Okay, yeah, I get it. Look at it clearly. Yes, those all can be the same thing. Exercise in what is the subject of the greatest wisdom. So this one is all almost like just the judgment is about spending your time on things that are worth thinking about
Yeah.
rather than whatever the heck that other one's talking about. Maybe thoughts that are not worth our time are rotting meat, and you should identify them by the stench ahead of time instead of you shouldn't have to look inside the bag and dig through it to know that it's rotten, maybe?
I think
Maybe
that's a
that's the
good
point.
interpretation. Yeah. I think
Aha,
it's
we
solid.
finally gotten it after all three.
We did it. We're stoically enlightened. Let's see.
I'm gonna leave this one open and see.
In book 9, near the first section, somewhere in the first section, he effectively points out that to be afraid of pain is to be afraid of something that's kind of just part of life. And I thought that was an interesting hit. Trying to decide where I think. Interesting. Yeah, and then let's see what else goes on number 9. It's been a hot
Is
minute.
looks like maybe at the end of the first. I'm looking at the other translation still, but end of the first page on this one, or like halfway through the section. So wherever halfway through the section is, could be the start of the next one. Of that pain thing.
Mm-hmm. To pursue pleasure is good and flee from pain is evil. That is blasphemous. Someone who does that is bound to find himself constantly reproaching nature, complaining that it doesn't treat the good and bad as they deserve. Yeah, so it'd be like, why, if I'm a good person, why am I suffering? Kind of thing, that mentality. I've seen a toxic mentality through some subsets of Christianity do that, right? Of if you're a bad person, bad things happen to you, but then that makes it all the more confusing when when life is difficult and you feel like you're doing everything you're supposed to, right? Like, my God, why have you forsaken me sort of mentality.
This is interesting to read, or I always think this thought is an interesting one to entertain because like, I guess my particular multicultural background, this seems like a very obvious
Mm-hmm.
thought that has been taught. Like, yeah, that's just how life is. Suffering is part of life. It's more or less unavoidable to have pain at some point to be. I mean, what is our whole life is structured around being hungry, being cold, or hot, or uncomfortable in some kind of way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything literally everything in human society it's that way because of these things. And yeah, and yet people continue to ignore this and do act that way, as you mentioned, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nonetheless, the also I linked the this other translation that I pulled up
Perf.
in the book club. The way he words it here is actually quite nice. It says, "He who dreads pain must sometimes dread that which must be a part of the order and beauty of the universe."
Yeah, I think that's a
I
really
like
good.
that actually.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it for sure.
But yeah, it's a good point. And a good thing to remember.
I'll come back to that. So it a lot of book 9 seems to sit on this not dwelling on the things you can't change, almost. But then also not giving into your vices. Let's see. I'm interested to see how this is different. I highlighted number 7. Do not be imposed on by appearances. Check your impulses and moderate your desire, and keep your reason always in her own power. So I'm interested to see how it's translated here. Blot out your imagination. Turn your desire to stone. Quench your appetites. Keep your mind centered on itself. All right.
This one says, "Wipe out the fancies of imagination. Stop all eager impulses to action. Extinguish keen desires and keep the governing part master of itself."
In my mind, this is definitely him talking to himself. I feel like he must be struggling with being okay with his circumstances in life. Because if I recall correctly, Marcus didn't have a lot of desire to be any kind of ruler, right? And so I often in this book have felt he's trying to convince himself. I think he does believe it, but sometimes I think on the harder days, as you put it, it's not as true to him. So I feel
One
like
the
he just.
people, the company, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're, you can imagine as the Roman emperor, who are you around? The highest ranking officials both in your own empire and in others that you may have to, dine and entertain and such. The kinds of things that people want to or are electing to engage in are things that often are going to be um, counter to his own principles,
Mm-hmm.
especially here if he's talking about resisting temptations and not, you know, not letting your mind run away with itself and not spending time on these sort of frivolous activities. I could imagine also part of that is other people expecting that he will partake in things that maybe he's like, that's kind of unsavory and a waste of time. You know,
Yeah.
even and maybe he has temptation toward those things, or maybe he doesn't and he's like disgusted by it and he's like, people really need to get their life together and stop, especially a ruler, right? He definitely has this feeling that you have a duty to people. If you're in charge, you have to be leading by example. You have to show them a better way and definitely not taking advantage, which all of those things would be, right? If
Right.
you're, I don't know, having like sexual conquests and gorging yourself on feasts every night and drinking yourself into a stupor until you, like, how are you going to make any good decisions if you're doing those kinds of things and spending your time that way when instead he's like, no, we should contemplate society and
Yeah.
be our best self and so on.
Yeah.
I think there was in the very beginning of one of book one or book two or something,
Mm-hmm.
he made some comment about his father not taking now I can't remember the proper term, but like he didn't have a younger man that he slept with.
Yeah.
That was a common practice at the time, and like abstaining from the sexual impulses that are very common that way. Had I mean, I assume he had kids or something at some point, right? He doesn't really mention that here much, but I don't know, maybe he was just very put off by that whole thing too.
Yeah, I think he was. And he definitely, I think he does a good job of kind of presenting his moral compass. I circled 24 because I thought it was wild. Children's anger, mere baubles, wretched souls, bearing up dead bodies, so that the picture of the underworld makes a more vivid impression. In the other version, it says childish tantrums, children's games, spirits carrying corpses. Odysseus in the underworld saw more real life. This feels like such a weird note. Like, I don't know if it's a full thought so much. He's like, come back to this later. Need to remember it.
Bearing up dead bodies. Yeah, that is a very harsh take too. Like, children's. I mean, I guess for an adult, if he meant it as like adults shouldn't be engaging in the sort of behavior that are common for children, that would be one thing. But this
Yeah.
kind of just sounds like, well, I guess we don't know. Childish tantrums, like, could be he could be making a commentary on grown adults acting like children.
Or there could just be a child nearby and he's angry at them.
Yeah. Well, now let's see. I'm gonna check on this one. What does it say? Quarrels of children at their play, and poor spirits carrying dead carcasses about with them. Hence, we may be more deeply affected with the repressions of the shades.
Hmm.
So, children fighting over pointless things.
Yeah. And
They're
carrying those
upset.
grudges, maybe.
Yeah, carrying dead carcasses about with them. I think.
It's like carrying old grudges, maybe. or
Yeah. Letting things weigh on
bitterness.
you that don't
Mm-hmm.
matter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That makes more sense.
Yes.
He's putting them all together.
Oh, I'd be interested in seeing how that's different. 42. He's like. Ah, that makes more sense. Is it possible for such impudent people not to be in the world? No, indeed. He's frustrated with people, like here. And
hmm
then for this ill behaved fellow is one of those necessary rascals that the world cannot dispense with. And then how does. There have to be shameless people in the world. This is one of them. So I get the sense of like there have to be bad people for there to be good people almost. Wild.
Oh yeah, and then he says also the same applies to the crafty, the faithless, and the faulty
Yeah.
in any respect. In this version, that's worded that way anyway. But that it there must be all these things, right? We can't be upset that somebody is rash and has no shame, or that they have no faith, or that they are wrong, because that's just how the universe is.
Mm-hmm.
And you should have good nature toward people who are like this, because it is just natural.
But he is very optimistic in a lot of his dealings, in all of his writing, in a lot of his writings, right? So even here in this translation over on the right, he says, whereas humans were made to help others, and when we do help others or help them to do something, we're doing what we were designed for. I feel like there's a lot of optimism in Marcus on what people are capable of, what they can do, and what they can be at their core, even if he also seems to be like, mean people gonna be mean.
Yeah.
Because it's funny to me, it almost feels like a flip-flop at first about between this like defeated sense of how people are to a truly high optimism level. Nah, people can
Yeah,
do the thing.
I didn't feel like he was defeated about it. Like he
Not
seems very
yeah, that's a
practical
bad
about it,
word.
right?
Mm-hmm.
He accepts people are like this, but like he has eyes. Like people are like this. People are still like this 2000 years later. So
Right.
this is just the nature of humans, and I think he's right too. If people can be taught to be a different way, people do have it in them as just like anyway, like most humans. I was going to say neurotypical, but that's not even true either. Like most people who have different illnesses or conditions that affect them that may so they don't qualify under that category, right? They're still going to have these same kinds of tendencies or potential in them as well.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably just a select few people who are kind of broken and like not even developmentally but like genetically something is wrong with them that makes it so it's not possible maybe.
Well, and sometimes we can only play
But
with the cards we're dealt, right? To borrow a phrase. I see this in some of my students of how difficult I feel like they can be, and sometimes it's just a matter of they've literally never been shown another way to be, right? In
mm-hmm.
every aspect of their home life and their family and their friend group, this is certain behaviors are all they've seen modeled, and it's real difficult for
Mm-hmm.
them to accept or learn a new behavior.
Also mindsets too,
Mm-hmm.
right? The when something happens, what people are telling them is the right way or what they should focus on. Oh, what you have to do, or you're a fool if you do this, or any kind of commentary like that from adults in their lives. And
Mm-hmm.
even if they have, because there are kids too who have bad models and have a feeling that it's wrong and
Right.
don't follow them and come out differently despite that because they have some kind of like, no, but that makes me feel bad and that can't be
Bad
right.
things make
Like,
me
I don't
feel
want to take
bad.
from people. I don't want to, only act selfishly. I want, like, I care about these other people and I want to do things that are good for everyone. And like, there are some kids that are just like that despite everyone that they're around being, selfish and jaded and maybe sometimes even cruel from how people have been cruel to them, or
Right.
there are a lot of ways. But the I guess beyond the models that they have, oh my god, I had a thought and it's like escaped. It's on the tip of my tongue, but sick brain is taking over.
No, not sick brain.
It was good too. Hmm, the
Well, Lee, now I'll never be enlightened, and it's your fault.
yeah. Yep. Maybe it'll come to me.
Hmm. So yeah, I don't dislike anything about Marcus's writings per se, but at least in this translation, I'll say 8 and 9 were some of the harder chapters for me to pick through. So that's my overall feelings about 8 and 9. Go team.
Should we read multiple versions, you think? Would it be in future? Like, I don't think we have we have got several books left
I
yet, but
am not opposed to personally looking at multiple versions. I just have to tell you, I don't think I'm going to be able to convince anyone except you and me, Lee, to do that.